Come on, let's do this a little bit better. You guys gave a very lackluster fuck, so let's give a real fuck. On the count of 3, I want everybody to scream fuck as loud as they can. This is the one place you're allowed to do it. 1, 2, 3. There we go. Now we're talking. My name is Mark Manson, and I am best known as the author of The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, that obnoxious orange book you see in every single airport you go into. I'm also a small business owner myself. I've been blogging. All right, somebody likes small businesses. I have a self-development blog. It's one of the largest self-development blogs in the world. It gets about 10 million visitors each year. And I kind of had it to pad my resume, so I added the fact that I once beat my college roommates 1 versus 3 in Trivial Pursuit. That is not verified, though. So what's my deal? What's my shtick? I have the very unfortunate, I guess, career choice of writing a self-help book, despite the fact that I can't really stand self-help stuff myself. Like most self-help people, they would run up here and they'd be like, "You're amazing, you're gonna change the world, and I'm gonna make you all successful for $9,000. I don't really believe in any of that. In fact, I kind of take the opposite approach. I don't think you're special. In fact, I think that most people in this room, myself included, are probably kind of awful. And I don't mean that, don't take that personally, it's just a fact of the human condition. Our brains are very inaccurate, we're full of all sorts of biases and misconceptions, our memory's terrible, our predictions are terrible, our perceptions are terrible. We're all a little bit fucked up. And so I think, and it's funny actually, because a couple months ago when I got on the phone with the Zero people, they were like, "Hey, so our theme is being human. You think you can work that into your talk?" And I was like, "Hold my beer." Humans are kind of fucked up. And I think any reasonable starting point for self-help or personal development is not about being special. It's about getting to a point where we're not unintentionally doing awful things to each other or ourselves. Because the thing is when you go around, you start telling everybody that they're special, they start thinking that they deserve things. And when they think they deserve things, they become entitled. And I think if you look back across history, all of the worst people, the reason they were so bad is because they thought they were special and they were entitled. So Darth Vader thought he was special, thought he deserved to rule the galaxy. Voldemort thought he was special, thought he deserved to take over the world of magic. I don't know, I didn't read Harry Potter. This fucking monkey don't even get me started on him. The point is that living a good life, it's not about being extraordinary, it's about doing ordinary things extremely well. And there's kind of a two-pronged benefit of this. One is you don't become a raging narcissist. But two, that's actually how you get extraordinary results, is you do the ordinary things extremely well. So the second way I kind of differ from most self-help people is I think motivation's overrated. If you don't believe me, I'll be on my hotel couch for the next 12 hours after this talk. Motivation's overrated because if you're not pursuing the right thing, if you're not valuing the right thing, then motivation actually hurts you, doesn't help you. There was a there was a meme I saw back when I was in college, it looked kind of like this. Motivation. Just remember, every corpse on Mount Everest was once an extremely motivated person. I told you, I'm kind of awful. The point is that if you're not pursuing the right thing, then being motivated, it's actually counterproductive. And here's the funny thing too, is that if you actually have something that's very important in your life, if you have strong values, which is always my starting point with anything I talk about, is values. If you have good, strong values, you don't need to be motivated. So you're actually doing something important. Motivation is not the cause of good action, it's the effect of good action. And finally, this makes me a bad American, but I argue that you shouldn't pursue happiness, that it's kind of a trap. And that's a lot of what I'm going to be talking about in this presentation today. So I'm going to try to argue to you that it is more efficient and just all around better for your well-being to pursue pain in life rather than happiness. Now that sounds very counterintuitive, that sounds very backwards. So what's the big deal about pain? Well, there's a few things. One is, it's your struggles that give your life a sense of meaning. So let me ask you this. What are the worst types of people on the planet? Everybody's dead silent.
Happiest people.
Everybody's like, it's 2018, Mark, don't torpedo your career right now. The worst people on the planet are kids who get everything they want. A spoiled little brat. They are ungrateful, unappreciative, obnoxious, selfish, self-centered, and ironically, they actually become miserable. And then they grow up and run for president and get elected. And the sad irony with spoiled kids is that their parents, the reason they spoil them is because they care about them, they love them. They see their kids suffering and they're like, oh, I don't want little Timmy or little Janie to feel any pain or to struggle at all, so let me fix that. And what they don't realize is that when you remove struggle from a person's life, the person gets no sense of what value certain things have. If you don't feel pain, you don't have an accurate metric of how valuable something is to you. And so what happens is these kids, they grow up and they're unappreciative. Everything is just empty and valueless. All right, that's kind of deep. A more practical argument for pain is that if you look at psychological research, pretty much the number one, if not like top three determinants of success in any field is how well people deal with pain. How resilient are you? Some psychologists call it grit, some measure it as resilience, but basically it's like how much bullshit can you deal with? How many times can you fall down, get back up, and try again? So pain's important on that level as well. And then a little bit later I'll be talking about how pain and sacrifice are actually strangely necessary to find happiness. And pain is actually a more efficient route to get to a happy life. So how many people in here have run a marathon before? It's actually more than I expected. Good for you guys. In my book, I use the example of a marathon because it's obviously it's an extremely difficult pursuit. It's a very difficult endeavor. You've got to invest months and months of your life. You've got to go out and buy a bunch of gear. Some people get coaches. They've got these training regimens. They wake up at 5 in the morning and run through wind and rain, and they do this for month after month after month. And then the race comes and they slog through the 40 kilometers or whatever it is, and then they finally get to the finish line and their family's there, and some friends are there, and everybody's cheering, and they get a medal, and they go have a glass of wine or something. It's a really great life moment. It's an incredible achievement. And I imagine the people in here who have done it, it's something they're very proud of, and that they look back on fondly. Now let's imagine for a second that there's this really evil group of terrorists who are strangely obsessed with road races. And they kidnap your family and they say, if you don't run a marathon, I'm going to kill your family. That would be a really awful experience. In fact, it would be traumatic. You might not even be able to do it because you'd have a mental breakdown because it would be so painful and so terrifying. Now, the funny thing about this example is that the actual physical action is exactly the same. You're physically doing the same thing. You're running the 26.2 miles. But the meaning is completely different. In one scenario, it's one of the best things that you've ever accomplished. In another scenario, it's one of the worst things that's ever happened to you, even though it's the exact same action. And so I use this as an example to kind of explain the power of choice. Because the difference between pain being something that is meaningful and important to us, and pain being something that is absolutely awful and debilitating, is the sense that we chose it. It's this perception that we brought it on ourselves. Because when we feel as though we chose it, we're no longer victims to it. It's a sacrifice, it's a cost of doing business, whatever. And when we feel as though we've chosen a certain struggle or chosen a certain problem, it's also what gives our lives meaning, because we're taking responsibility for it and we're like, all right, I'm willing to sacrifice myself to do this. And it's this choice around what our problems mean that make them, in my opinion, it's this one simple thing that makes them easier to bear. Now, at this point, what most people say is they say, fuck you, Mark, I didn't choose my problems, this is bullshit, it's not my fault. And I said, go on. My argument is that even in those situations where we feel as though we didn't choose our problems, there is still a long chain of decisions that led us up to that point. Basically, we're always choosing whether we realize it or not. And if you're like, fuck you, I didn't choose anything, that itself is a choice. There's a choice behind everything. Let me give you an example from my own life. My mother-in-law, well, that could kind of be the end of the story right there. Just kidding. My mother-in-law is a wonderful woman, and she hosts Christmas for the extended family each year. And my wife's family, like every family, has that one person that nobody can stand being around. Every family's got that one person. I call these people emotional vampires because they basically, any room they go into, they just suck the joy out of me. And in my wife's family, it's her aunt, so my mother-in-law's sister. And every year she would come to Christmas and she would just create all this drama and create problems and piss everybody off, and it would basically ruin Christmas. And a few years ago, it kind of reached a breaking point. My mother-in-law was like, I can't do this anymore. I don't even want to have Christmas. Fuck the presents, no turkey, I'm done. I said, this is unfair, I don't deserve this. And my wife said, she was like, well, you know, crazy idea, maybe you don't have to invite her. Like, you're choosing to invite her, so like, you can't really complain that much. My mother-in-law was like, no, I have to invite her. She's family, and it's Christmas. And you always have to invite family on Christmas. And my wife was like, well, you're choosing to believe that you have to invite family on Christmas, so you're still choosing to invite her, and so you still kind of like, yeah, it's your problem. Mother like, no, I didn't choose that you have to invite all family at Christmas. That's what everybody does. That's the tradition. It's not my fault. My wife said, well, you're choosing to do what everybody else does then. And it just went on and on and on. And as you can imagine, the conversation didn't really get anywhere. But eventually, a couple years later, my mother-in-law did disinvite the aunt. And essentially what she did is she picked a better problem. She's like, okay, well, I can have the problem of my awful sister at Christmas, or I can have the problem of a great Christmas, and a sister that's always mad at me anyway. And so she chose the better problem. And so the heuristic I introduced in my book, and that I always try to think of things in my own life, is whenever you're facing a decision, you want to choose the better problem. Because here's the thing, is that life is always going to give you problems. If you, just from the fact that you find anything important, there are going to be problems as a result. And so you might as well be choosing your problems instead of just letting the problems be chosen for you. And in my opinion, this is the fundamental component of being autonomous and taking care of yourself. Now, another thing comes up when I start talking about this, which is people say, but, wait, some people are legit victims. And this is totally true. Unfortunately, all of us, at some point in our life, something tragic or awful happens, and it's completely outside of our control. We had no choice in it. There was nothing we could have done. But the same way there's a chain of choices that lead up to any problem, there's also a chain of choices that lead into the future from any problem. And so even if you don't choose the problem or choose what happened to you, you're always choosing what that problem means. And this was best expressed, there's a guy named Viktor Frankl, who he was a prominent psychiatrist in the 1930s and 40s. He also, unfortunately, was a Jew in Austria when Hitler took over. And so he ended up in Auschwitz. And he noticed an incredible thing after about a year or two in Auschwitz. He noticed that the people that survived, it wasn't because they were younger or stronger or they had better jobs. He noticed it was the people who had some sort of explanation of meaning for what was happening to them. He found that he could predict who was going to die next based on who lost hope, who lost that explanation. And the people in the camp, they had completely different explanations. For some people, it was religion or God. For some people, it was family. They wanted to survive for their kids. Some people had explanations about community or nationalism. And eventually Frankl found that he had to adopt an explanation himself. He decided that the only thing that was worse than the suffering in the camp was the idea that his wife would be a widow. So he decided that he would survive, he would endure anything just to make sure that that didn't happen. That became his meaning, and that became his choice for what the whole ordeal meant to him. So essentially, we're always choosing, no matter what, and if we don't choose our problems, they'll be chosen for us. And so this raises a very important question, which I've called the most important question of your life. Very subtle, I know. By the way, I'd like to acknowledge that I just transitioned from the Holocaust to SpongeBob. The most important question of your life. You can phrase it in a few different ways, but I like to phrase it this way recently. What kind of masochist are you? Because if you have to pick problems, then you might as well pick problems that you kind of get a sick pleasure out of. Because another kind of sneaky truth is that we all like to be tied up and slapped around a little bit. Just a little. Told you, we're kind of awful. But it's true. Human happiness, if you think of it as kind of like a U-curve, if there's way too much pain and struggle, we lose hope. We give up. And if there's not enough pain and struggle, we don't appreciate anything. It becomes valueless. And so there's like a goldilocks amount of suffering that we all need. Just right. And I think finding happiness or finding purpose in your life is about finding that Goldilocks spot for yourself. What pursuit, what profession, what relationship that it's like, all right, this is the right balance for me. And on a practical level, I think it's finding this area that gives you the right amount of pain that invigorates you is ultimately, it determines what you're going to get good at. It becomes your edge in whatever you do. I didn't always want to be a writer. When I got out of school, I wanted to be a musician. I played guitar. And I went to music school, and it was a very intensive program. You have to study music all day, and then you have to practice your instrument 5, 6, 7 hours each night. And I made it about 2 semesters. And I remember going into my guitar lesson, and like the skin was falling off my fingers, and my wrist was locking up, and I was totally miserable. And my guitar teacher looked at me right in the face and said, "Your problem is you don't practice enough." I was like, fuck me. And it sucked because that struggle, that problem, it started to feel hopeless. It became too much for me. And worst of all, it started to feel like I didn't choose it. You know, in my head, I chose standing on a stage like this, jamming out. And meanwhile, I'm sitting in a practice room 6 hours a day, not getting anywhere. And because it felt like I no longer had chosen that problem, I started to lose hope, and I started to become depressed. And there was one guy in the program, he was better than everybody. He was like the one guy in our program that everybody was like, he's gonna make it. The rest of us, we'll see. His name was Chris McQueen. And I remember I went and I sat down with him at lunch one day. And I was like, all right, clearly this guy knows something I don't. He's got some sort of secret. So what is it? So I sit down with him, I'm like, so what's your practice regimen like? How do you warm up in the morning? How do you approach a new song? And he gave me very blasé answers. It was same shit that everybody knows. So I got frustrated. I said, well, what do you do when you get burnt out? Like when you don't want to practice anymore? He was like, oh, well, I play some other songs. I'm like, no, you're not understanding. Like, what if you want to play no songs? What if you just like want to throw your guitar out the window? And he looked at me really funny. And he was like, well, I guess I just like wouldn't play guitar anymore. And so I dropped out of music school the next week. And today, Chris has 2 Grammys, and I haven't touched a guitar in about 8 years. Now, if you jump ahead about 10 years, I went to another school, graduated, started a business, started an online blog, and the blog started to kind of take off around 2012, 2013. And I would go to conferences like this about internet business, internet publishing, and people would come up to me in the halls and be like, man, Mark, really like your writing, man. Can I ask you a few questions? I'm like, yeah, sure. How do you write so much? Like, what's your regimen like? What's your routine like? How do you warm up in the morning? How do you approach a new article? And I gave the same boring fucking answers that Chris gave me. It's like, I don't know, dude, I just do it. And then the people, they got disappointed and walked off. And I started thinking about it. I was like, maybe that secret that I was looking for, or that these people were looking for, really all it was that Chris enjoyed sitting in a room by himself playing the same song over and over for 6 hours, and most people don't. And I enjoy rewriting the same paragraph over and over for 6 hours, and most people don't. And that's probably like the 20% that determines the 80% of the result. And I think this is particularly important in this day and age where we have so much opportunity in front of us. And there's this constant draw that we should be doing more, learning more, expanding our business, offer new services. But really, the only place you have your edge is what is the bullshit that you're willing to deal with that most people don't. Because that's what you're going to be excellent at, and that's what's going to set you apart. And there's a little bit of a baked in benefit here to bring it back to the meaning. Because look, it'd be easy for me to get up here and be like, let's talk about success. Everybody wants to be successful. Everybody wants to make money. Everybody wants to be loved. That's easy. That's boring. Everybody in here is exactly the same when it comes to that. What makes us different is that each of us likes to suffer in a slightly different way than the person next to us. And that's what makes us better at something than somebody else. And that also gives our work a sense of meaning as soon as we recognize that. As soon as we start using that as the heuristic to make our decisions. If you're choosing your problem, then the side effect is that it becomes more meaningful because you're aware of the sacrifice you're making. And this is important because without that meaning, even if you do become wildly successful, without the meaning, the happiness is very empty. People ask me all the time, they're like, hey man, how's your life changed since the book came out? And I always get really awkward and don't know how to answer. Because I feel like people who ask me this, they expect me to say that like, I bought 6 Lamborghinis and I'm doing bong rips with Justin Bieber. My life has not changed. 99.9% of what I do with my time is exactly the same as before. And yeah, it's super cool having the sales numbers and having, the bestseller list and everything. Like, it's very gratifying for a little while. But my editor or my agent will email me and they'll be like, hey, guess what? You're #1 in Burma. And I'm like, holy shit, that's awesome. Where's Burma? And then 5 minutes later, I'm like, where the fuck's that pizza I ordered? It's already gone. The high is already gone. And it's because the external surface level stuff is empty. Unless you have some meaning rooting it, you have some sort of sacrifice or struggle rooting it, it's empty. It comes and then it goes. And for me, that meaning is ultimately the struggle I put into writing the damn thing. It's like I spent 2 years putting this idea after this one and seeing that worked. And decades from now, when all this is over, I don't get invited to shit like this anymore, that's what I'm going to remember. That I put the ideas in order, in that special order, that it affected thousands of people. And that's amazing. That's something that I'll always be proud about. So speaking of writing books, my next book, the working title of my next book is Everything is Fucked, a book about hope. And whereas subtle art was very much inwardly focused, talking about these questions of struggle and meaning and purpose on the individual level, the next book is going to look at these questions on more of a societal level. Because I think these points about the importance of pain, generating meaning and purpose, it's having a serious effect in our societies today. Part of it is that I think the way our technological development's been aimed is that we're trying to improve things by making everything more convenient and more pleasant. But the problem is that we give up some of that struggle that generates meaning in the process. And the other issue is, I call it the rule of more, but some people call it the paradox of choice. It's also known as status anxiety, but it's basically the more opportunity each of us have, the more difficult it is to give up what we have to give up to pursue one thing. So I'm going to hit you with a couple scary charts. You know, because what's better than talking about depression and suicide at 9 in the morning? The top chart here is symptoms of depression. The bottom chart is symptoms of anxiety. These are not diagnoses, these are simply symptoms. This is over the last 70 years. So this is not like, oh, Facebook fucked us up. This is like, there's something inherent in what's going on. I mean, if you look at this and you just think about it, this data started in World War II, which is pretty crazy. This is the suicide rate in the US. I know it's very, don't worry, we'll get to the sunshine and rainbows later. It's gone up about 50% in the last 20 years, and I was curious because I'm coming down here, I looked it up for Australia as well. You guys did something way more sensible than my country. You actually got rid of your guns. So, yeah, clap it up, seriously. Maybe I just won't go home. So this data is split between firearm and non-firearm. Obviously the firearm has been dropping since the 90s, but the non-firearm related suicides have been going up for about 35 years now. So if everything's getting so amazing and efficient, what the hell is the deal? And I think there's a basic assumption that we've all operated on that is maybe harming us a little bit without us realizing it. It's that we've always assumed that we want to suffer less, but I think we need to reframe that as suffering better. Problem number one, technological development revolves around limiting discomfort and inconvenience. The example I think about with this is like, if you traveled 20 years ago, it's a completely different experience. You could do an entire trip today to a foreign country with nothing but apps. You wouldn't have to talk to a single person. A car would always be there, hotel always ready, planes, tour guides, everything. You can get audio guides for every museum in the world online now. And that's great, super convenient. But what you miss is there's a certain pleasure or a certain meaning that comes from the struggle of landing in a foreign place, having to ask locals how to get around, figuring out where's the best place to go and when, and having a little bit of spontaneity. I think the second problem is greater media presence creates this fictional idea that no one else is going through what we're going through. The internet's kind of created this situation where all we're exposed to is a highlight reel of everybody's life. You know, 10, 20 years ago, if I wanted to catch up with an old friend, I'd call him up on the phone. I'd be like, hey man, how's it going? How's the baby? He'd be like, oh, well, it's great, but it's, you know, I'm kind of nervous and it's really difficult, but I'm really excited. And you get to hear the internal tension that exists within everybody. Like every experience is both good and bad at the same time in different quantities. And engaging with people, we get to see that. That's what creates intimacy, is to see that dynamic within each person. But online, that gets gutted. You just get a Photoshop baby. And you're like, damn, I guess he's doing great. And then finally, instant gratification culture tells us we should be feeling better right meow. Which is, this is just unrealistic. Every one of us, at some point in our life, we're going to feel like shit. We're going to be miserable. It's normal, it happens to everybody. But the only thing that can make it worse is deciding that it needs to be over, that there's something wrong with that. I think we're entering, well, we're not even entering, I think we're already in it. We're basically, we live in an age of abundance, and I think what we're called to do, what will give us an edge, both in our personal lives and our professional lives, is where everybody is overflowed with information and opportunities, we all have to develop the skills to find the very few things that matter the most. We have to find the few things that are worth giving a fuck about. Because that is fast becoming a rare skill among people. So that means focus on fewer things and do them really well. This applies to business as well as life. And focus on fewer people and really care about them. Same deal, business as well as life. And focus on less information of higher relevance. Don't get caught down the rabbit holes. Don't try to find out everything about everything. I think it's this skill of simplifying and condensing that is going to be most important. So to sum up, key takeaways: you're always choosing, so choose your problems wisely. 2, your problems determine the quality of your life, not your successes. A good life is a life with good problems. You have a lot of great success, but a lot of awful problems. And that success will cease to matter. Number 3, meaning matters, not happiness. Doing less produces more. Because the ability to do less requires that sacrifice. It requires that ability to tolerate pain. Number 4, Mark Manson is incredibly handsome and a brilliant speaker. You don't have to clap, it's on the thing. Duh. Number 5, I'll get back to you. Number 6, buy my book. Thank you.